Welcome to Section 2 of the Historical Foundations of Rehabilitation Counseling, presented by Michael Keener, Director of the Rehabilitation Counseling Program at Maryville University of St. Louis. Once again, we'll be emphasizing one learning outcome, which is to gain an understanding of the historical context of rehabilitation counseling by articulating how the profession was shaped and evolved by legislation. Again, as we're going through Section 2 of this presentation, please think about the following bullet points. Think about how there was a shift from counselors as experts to empowering client independence. Think about how there's a shift from service provision being an economic gain philosophy to service provision as a disability rights philosophy, again, increasing inclusion and dependence through employment. Think about how eligibility criteria expanded from individuals with physical disabilities to include all individuals with disabilities. And finally, think about rehabilitation services were made permanent, funding to states increased, and priorities were for individuals with the most significant disabilities. Now we're in the modern age of legislation, specifically talking about the Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1973, which emphasized consumer involvement, the individual written rehabilitation plan, and mandated service to individuals with significant disabilities. Also things that were important were the different sections. Section 501, affirmative action and federal hiring. All federal departments had to have hiring, placement, and advancement plans for individuals with disabilities. Section 502, accessibility, began to develop accessibility standards. Section 503, affirmative action by federal contract recipients, prohibits employment discrimination by agencies receiving federal contracts exceeding $10,000. And Section 504, equal opportunity, prohibits exclusion based on disability in any federal program or activity, for example, colleges, childcare, and schools. The Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1992 advanced concepts of empowerment, self-determination, and informed choice, developed standards for public VR counselors and a process for rehabilitation counsel professional development, and emphasized a strength-based philosophy, improve services to minority groups, a 60-day eligibility requirement, and an order of selection. The Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1998 increased collaboration with consumers and counselors and developed the Individualized Plan for Employment, the IPE. The Workforce Investment Act required states to coordinate most federally funded employment and training services into a single comprehensive one-stop system. Ticket to Work and Work Incentive Improvement Act, designed to provide beneficiaries and recipients of SSI, SSDI, or both, the incentives and supports they need to prepare for or advance in work. It expanded options for continuing healthcare coverage for recipients transitioning to work and attempted to eliminate the disincentives to work for recipients of SSI or SSDI cash benefits. Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It consolidated job training programs under the Workforce Investment Act of 1988 into a single funding stream. It was designed to help job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services to succeed in the labor market and to match employers with skilled workers. Requires states to strategically align workforce development programs and promotes accountability and transparency. For more information on the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, please see the link provided. And now we're taking a step back to the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And the reason for that is that the other legislation discussed is rehabilitation legislation, where the Americans with Disability Act is a civil rights legislation. So although it applies, it's slightly different. It has 5 titles that we'll talk about. Title 1 is in employment, non-discrimination against a qualified individual. Title 2, public entities, talks about public transportation and accessibility. Title 3, public accommodations, removing barriers for full and equal enjoyment into the community. And then Title 4, telecommunications, functionally equivalent services to deaf or hard of hearing individuals. And Title 5 is miscellaneous provisions. Digging a little deeper in the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, it defines disability, which is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of such individual. A record of such impairment and the individual being regarded as having such impairment, determining who is qualified to work. The ADA does not obligate employers to hire, promote, or provide any other privilege of employment to an individual who simply cannot perform the essential functions of the job. Americans with Disability Act again discusses reasonable accommodation, which means modifying or adjusting a job application process or work environment to enable a qualified individual with a disability to be considered for a job. An employer is not required to make an accommodation if it would impose an undue hardship on the operation of the employer's business. An undue hardship is defined as an action requiring significant difficulty or expense. If a particular accommodation would be an undue hardship, the employer must try to identify another accommodation that will not pose such a hardship. Again, reasonable accommodations include modification or adjustments to 1, the job application process, 2, the work environment or the circumstances in which a job is customarily performed, and policies set out the benefits and privileges of employment. Again, for more information, you can see the website below. The Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment of 2008. It made changes to how the definition of a disability is interpreted. The focus on if an individual is discriminated against rather than if a person's disability fits the definition of disability. It also further expanded or discussed major life activities, which include, but are not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working. And it also further expanded major bodily functions, as a major activity also includes the operation of a major bodily function, including but not limited to functions of the immune system, normal cell growth, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, and reproductive functions. And again, the above was quoted from the below website. At this point, we're at a point for review. So please think about the following slides and how they are meant to review and reinforce this section of the presentation. After proceeding through the following slides, continue with the third section of the presentation. Reflecting on what we discussed, think about the key historical points. Think about shift from counselors as experts to empowering client independence, shift from service provision being an economic gain philosophy to service provision as a disability rights philosophy, again, meaning employment helps increase inclusion and independence. Think about how eligibility criteria expanded from individuals with physical disabilities to include all individuals with disabilities. And finally, think about how rehabilitation services were made permanent, funding to states increased, and priorities were for individuals with the most significant disabilities. As we wrap up section 2, again, think about your understanding of our learning outcome which is to gain an understanding of the historical context of rehabilitation counseling by articulating how the profession was shaped and evolved by legislation.